And welcome to episode number 123 of The Showrunner. I am Jared Morris, serial podcast host and eternal believer in the power of balancing pride and humility. And here with me, as always, is my co-host, Johnny Naster, host of the world-renowned and best-selling Hack the Entrepreneur, and a man who recently launched an online course called The Roadmap to Freedom, The Simple Path to Passive Income, which you can learn more about at roadmaptofreedom.co. And which I didn't tell Johnny that I was going to promote at the beginning right here. So hopefully that's okay.
That's very much okay.
Put in here. We are your podcasting mentors. Excited as always to be with you for another week of talking about not just how to podcast, but more specifically how to drive meaningful results from a podcast-centered marketing strategy. And this week, we are going to discuss some elements of your podcast that are pretty easy to overlook or to take for granted, but that can really make a huge impact on your ability to get discovered, which is, of course, the first step toward driving meaningful results from your podcast. And I call these elements low-hanging fruit because they are pretty simple changes, pretty simple potential issues to check out, and then pretty simple changes to make that can really make a difference for your show. And we shouldn't overlook them in our haste to seek more advanced strategies for our shows. But before we get to all of that, it is time to welcome in my co-host, Johnny Naster, and we will do so by hitting up the random question generator so that we can learn a little bit more about Mr. Naster. So here we go. Okay, here's your random question, Johnny. Do you prefer a quiet night at home or going out to a big party?
Quiet night at home.
That was a quick answer. Why is that?
I'm not really a fan of big parties, and I really like my home. If it would have been like a rock show, like my favorite, one of my favorite bands, or like, yeah, I'll totally go out to a show. But just to go to a big party, yeah, I like them, but no. If I had to choose, and I did, I would choose stay home.
I'm with you. Nice. You know, my wife and I, we're friends. We can have lots of fun together, and now that we have a daughter, it's kind of fun just having a quiet night in. So, I think I'm with you on that.
Awesome.
I think I'm with you on that. By the way, congrats on the launch of the Roadmap to Freedom.
Thank you, sir.
It's awesome.
It was fun.
It is fun. Anything that we should let Showrunner folks know about it?
Well, you said it, and they can check it out if they want at the site. It's just the one part of it right now. There's 6 parts in total, but I'm only launching them as I go, so that it wasn't a big, overwhelming sort of thing. I'm doing them as we go and putting them out as we go.
And I assume once you're kind of done with this whole process, you'll probably have plenty to kind of teach us about what you've learned about a launch and different things like that. So we'll look forward to that, because a lot of showrunners I know are running a show as in part to promote, a course or to build an audience for a course. So I imagine you'll have a lot to teach about that.
Definitely.
So that'll be good. Okay. Well, if this is your first time listening to The Showrunner, welcome. We are glad that you're here. You may find that this is not your typical podcast about podcasting, and that is exactly the way that we want it. If you have been with us before, welcome back. We appreciate you being with us again, and we hope to be better today than we were the last time. That's our goal every week. And whether you're a newbie or a grizzled Showrunner veteran, if at any point during your journey with us, you decide that you want more, that you want to get serious and take the next step as not just a podcaster, but as a showrunner, we are ready for you. Visit our homepage, showrunner.fm, and drop your email address into the field that you will see right there at the top of the page. That's the best way to stay connected with us and with the show. And if you ever want to contact us directly, you can just hit reply on one of our emails, ask us a question, and we will be happy to answer. And speaking of grizzled showrunner veterans, this week we want to shine our showrunner spotlight on Chris Connor. And Chris is a guy, Johnny, that we have watched develop actually 2 different shows during his time with us, Life Sciences Marketing and his new show, Flip Turns. And recently, another longtime showrunner, Sonia Thompson, was a guest on Flip Turns. Here is a quick little clip from that episode of Flip Turns.
Welcome to episode 7 of Flip Turns. I'm your host, Chris Connor.
It was the beginning of me on a path of discovery. But actually, the way I like to describe it, it was a path of rediscovery.
And I discovered that I'm an athlete.
This is Sonia Thompson, a 38-year-old consultant and author who has come a long way from where she was 7 years ago to where she is now.
So just a short clip. Obviously, Chris has a great voice for podcasting, and the music that he chose, I think, is really, really good. But after appearing on that episode, Sonia posted this in our Showrunner Facebook community. I just want to read it to you. Quote, "Just want to take a moment to brag on our fellow showrunner, Chris Connor. His new show, Flip Turns, is amazing and has totally made me rethink what the heck I'm doing as a showrunner. His use of storytelling and narrative and music and production is just fabulous, and it makes me want to step up my game in a big way. He also demonstrates that you can put out high-quality work like this without a major budget or a big team behind you. Great show, Chris. Can't wait to dive into the rest of your episodes while taking tons of notes on things to do to improve my show running." Unquote. That was all from Sonia. And I couldn't have said it better myself, which is why I didn't even try and just decided to read Sonia's quote. But it's awesome to see because Chris just continues to grow and evolve as a showrunner. And he is absolutely a great example to emulate of someone who has absorbed lots of teaching, lots of advice from many different sources, and hasn't been afraid to show up for his audience over and over again and continue to deliver a better and more meaningful show and just continue to improve and put out a better and better product. So kudos to Chris. Check out his shows, Life Sciences Marketing and Flip Turns. And we'll put a link in the show notes to this particular inspiring episode of Flip Turns with Sonia Thompson. It's a really, really interesting episode about Sonia's kind of path to rediscovery and how swimming fit into that. So we just wanted to shine that spotlight on Chris, give him some congratulations. And Johnny, any thoughts from you on this or anything else before we dive into this week's main topic?
I really like the spotlight section. I think it's a great feature, and obviously Sonia and Chris are great people. And I like the spotlight section as it's in this context where it was one of the showrunners already sort of spotlighting herself, somebody else. Like, it wasn't like Chris on there like, man, check out my new show and talk about this on the show. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think more of us should do that. Like when you appreciate something somebody's created or doing, or anything about their show or something, like, go out on social media and say that. Like, oftentimes we only hear when people don't like something about what we did, then they'll go and tell everybody. But it's like, it's really nice. I think it's something that we should all try and strive to do more of, which is just highlight how somebody has taught you something, or now you're emulating it, or just how they've made your day better in some way. So I think that's great, Sonia. And
well, I agree with you. And I think that's great to do, not just from the standpoint of helping somebody else out and, hopefully the good feelings that you get from shining a positive light on somebody else. But if you need some sort of, I don't know, selfish motivation to do that, like, it does help you build your own authority to share things that you think your audience is going to like, that they then tune into and like. It's like one more notch in, oh yeah, I trust his opinion. So when something just genuinely, when you're like, wow, that was a great podcast episode, take the extra few minutes to share it, because not only are you really going to do something nice for that person, and if they see it, they're going to really appreciate it, but and that should hopefully make you feel good, but you really help build your own authority by doing so. So hopefully you don't necessarily need that selfish reason to do so, but there are many, many reasons to go out and do that. So we just wanted to explain those. All right, we ready for the main topic, Johnny?
We are ready.
Okay, so let's jump in here and talk about our main topic this week. And as I mentioned in the intro, it's about low-hanging fruit, some really simple changes that you can make to your show that are going to help you attract more listeners. And the inspiration for this was actually a podcaster that I worked with recently. Johnny, you and I have started to do some kind of one-on-one consulting with podcasters, with showrunners. We haven't necessarily made a big announcement about that or put it on the website. Although if you're interested in something like that, just send me an email, jared@showrunner.fm. It's more something that we've been, just kind of doing on a one-off basis right now, that make it a little bit more organized as we move forward. But this particular person that I worked with, I had an introductory call with her, and found out that she has a huge Instagram following. She had launched a podcast and had a membership program that was pretty strong. She's got some members in there. She's kind of trying to create this movement, for her audience and kind of build a business for herself that, gives her the freedom and independence that we're all looking for. And she was doing pretty well. But she wanted to take her podcast to the next level, and it was already about 12 to 13 episodes in. But this is someone who, when she does something, really wants to do it well. And I really found her attitude and commitment to making it better, and her humility and understanding that there were things that she maybe didn't know. I really found that to be inspiring. And so we talked, and then I listened to her show, and it had a lot of good qualities in it. And she said that her main goal in working with me was to figure out ways to attract more listeners and get more people into her funnel to then hopefully get more people, obviously, into her membership program. And so I started looking at some of the ways that her listeners might find her show. And that's when I found a lot of things that to me were pretty basic. But that, to her, obviously, she hadn't thought about these things yet. And so I texted her back and I was like, hey, I found a lot of, low-hanging fruit, just things that should be pretty simple to change that I think can really make a big impact for her. And she was really excited. She's like, okay, let's do it. Let's schedule this call. And we had a call, and I went over all these things with her, and she just seemed absolutely overjoyed with this. And she's been texting me since then, like excited about every little change that she's made and really excited about what these changes can do for her. So I want to go over some of the main areas that I found here and talk about these things, because these may be things that you've already done, you've already thought of. You're like, yeah, no duh, like of course I've done that. But there may also be things that you forgot about or that you overlooked. And there are actually things in here after doing this that I realized on some of my shows. I was like, man, I've been so focused on doing some of the more advanced stuff or doing this, that, or the other, that this basic thing I just kind of forgot about. And so there should be something in here for everybody that no matter what stage you're at, you might have just overlooked this little thing. And that's okay. Like, it happens. There's a lot of little things. I mean, there's a lot of boxes that we have to check. So let's go over these and just make sure that we're all on the same page and that we pick all of this low-hanging fruit to make sure that we're doing everything we can to put our show in a position to be found by the people who should be listening to it. So, Johnny, let's start out here with the first step. And this was the most obvious one for me with this particular show. But after we had first talked, I needed to find her show. I didn't remember off the top of my head what her website was. And so I Googled her name, and I didn't find her website. Like, I just, Googled her first and last name and didn't find her website. And that to me was a big red flag, because what are most people going to do, Johnny, when they look for a piece of information that they don't know, or they're trying to find a website? Where's the first place they're going to go?
Yellow Pages.
Yeah, right.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, they're going to go to Google, and they're going to type in the first thing that they remember. Now, in her defense, she kind of has a brand name, right? Like, she's a personal trainer. And so she's got this brand name, which is like trainer in her name. And so probably 90% of people who know her or know of her, who found her on Instagram, know her by this brand name. And when you Google the brand name, her website homepage did come up. So in her defense, she kind of had that part of it. But what about people like me that just know her by her first name? Why shouldn't the website come up first for that? Because what ended up coming up was, videos and a couple other social media sites and some other things, not her website with the 4 or 6 site links below it, like that nice search engine result where it's like, okay, this is a website that's been around. I can even click right here and find the podcast. This is what I want. And so I looked at her site, looked at the title tag of her homepage, which you can see, if you look at a web browser and you look up in the tab, you can see what the SEO title tag is. And it didn't have her first name in it. And I said, this would be a very simple fix. Just put your first name in the title tag, put it in your SEO description. And chances are, once that cycles through Google, now when people Google your name, your website will come up just like when they Google your brand name. And this way, you don't give a potential listener the experience that you gave me when I first looked, which is, oh crap, I've got to dig in and look for this. Like, we are trained and we're on Google. We Google it and we're going to click within 2 or 3 seconds. We don't often spend a lot of time looking and scrolling and investigating. So you don't want to, when someone is impulsed and excited to find you, you don't want them to have to wait any longer than necessary. And there is no reason, if it's a common term that people might search, that the exact page that you want coming up isn't coming up, because oftentimes it's just a matter of using your SEO title tag the smart way. So This is number one in terms of low-hanging fruit. What happens when people Google your name or your brand name? Go look, and if it's not what you want, if it's not the web page that you want, probably your homepage, use the SEO title tag to put that term in there and make sure that it's what comes up when people look. And also, if you do videos, if you have social media accounts, those kinds of things that you want to come up as well, make sure that they come up. And if they don't, again, use the proper tags, use the proper names in the titles so that it's easy for Google to say, okay, when they Google that name, this, these should be the things that come up. It's all about just communicating properly to the search engines. This is low-hanging fruit that we can all do. Your thoughts, Joe?
So those are called Google site links.
Site links, yes.
If somebody doesn't know, and it's kind of confusing, actually. So this is fundamentals of a website, and WordPress does it pretty well, especially if you use like the Yoast plugin or something. But there's no actual way to do it. If you knew that, like to get the actual proper site links, because actually, as you checked, I just went to see under Hack the Entrepreneur what it is, and it's got 2 pages. Well, the one page makes sense, the other page doesn't make sense, and I used to have 6 of them. And if you look it up in Google support, they actually are saying how they're working with algorithms and they haven't given somebody away. But it's really about using Yoast, setting up your site properly for SEO. But if you're out there looking for the exact way to set it up or what to type in to make it work, there's no actual way with Google yet, unfortunately.
With just site links. So just to make sure people don't get confused, like if you want, and the site links, again, like when you see a search engine result, you'll see the title, you'll see the description, and then you might see 2 to 4 to 6 additional links to a site. That's what we're saying that you can't dictate. But in terms of like the terms that are in your title, your SEO title, you can change those very easily. And that's the low-hanging fruit that we want to talk about to make sure that that page comes up. Now, if you get the site links and all that, that is a nice bonus to have. But the most important thing is that the page that you want to surface first when people search, that is the page that surfaces first when people search. And there are typically 1 or 2 easy changes to make sure that happens. Especially if you have like if you have a brand name, if you have your first and last name that aren't, if you're not John Smith or something, like if it's Jared Morris or John Nastor, those are names not everybody has who has a podcast and does the kind of things that we do. So the sites that we want to come up should come up.
Right. I would definitely use like Yoast or something, like the free plugin even, because it kind of walks you through and it asks you for the brand name and all that, and then it places it in the right places for you.
Yep. Yes.
Great point.
Okay, so before we move on to the second part of this, Johnny, let's take a few minutes and let's talk about Hover. And we've been mentioning Hover on some recent episodes. They are our new sponsor here on the Showrunner. We're very excited to be working with them. And one of the main reasons that we're excited to work with them is that, in addition to appreciating their support for our show, obviously, we use Hover ourselves and we believe in their product, which, if you're going to do ads for a company on your podcast, that should be a prerequisite. Make sure that you use the product, believe in it yourself so that you know that you can recommend it to your audience. And we can. That's why we're happy to recommend it to podcasters, to people who listen to the Showrunner as a place to get your domain name. And I think what certainly I appreciate a lot, having had some bad experiences with places where I buy domains, is that Hover doesn't include annoying upsells in the checkout process, which I absolutely hate. It has a clean user interface. They pride themselves on best-in-class customer support, which if you ever need to make changes with your domain, is often something that's very important. And there are 400-plus domain name extensions available. So you can choose from the classics, like the .com and the .net, as well as fun niche extensions that you might want to use for your show. Johnny, I know you've used Hover a lot, perhaps even more than me. What have been your favorite parts about the Hover experience so far?
I'm gonna put it down to expense or lack of. I get really frustrated when I buy a product and then the things that should come with it that I feel are like, oh well, that you want John at yourdomain.com, that'll be another $10. Like, how is that another $10? I just bought the domain. I own the domain now. And Hover includes all that stuff. You get your emails, you get your privacy. There was another company I used for a client, and it was $10 an email for as many as you wanted. You just keep paying. And then Whois to get it, your privacy was like another $10 or $15 a year. I was like, that's ridiculous. So Hover, you buy the domain, you own the domain, and you get everything else included.
And if you take action on this now, we have worked out a deal for you. So go to hover.com/showrunner and get started today, and you will get 10% off of your first purchase. Remember, no upsells, a clean and easy user interface, a best-in-class customer support team, and of course, you help out the Showrunner too, which we appreciate. So get 10% off your first purchase today at hover.com/showrunner. All right, Johnny. So we are talking about low-hanging fruit that listeners can, changes that listeners can make that are going to help them attract more listeners to their website. And so we talked about number one, which is to investigate what happens when you Google your name or your brand name and then make the necessary changes to ensure that the page that you want to come up actually does come up. The second element is to just take a look at your website and make sure that your website is doing the basics, right? There's a lot of advanced stuff that you can do with your website and, all kinds of automation and funky stuff that you can do, but don't look at that stuff until you know that your website is doing the basics. And you might think, well, of course my website is doing the basics, but have you actually looked? Because sometimes it can be easy for those things to get lost in the shuffle. So what do I talk about when I'm talking about the basics? Well, the first one is making your podcast easy to access. So do you have a link in your navigation bar that says podcast or, my show, whatever you're going to call it, so that when people go to your website, they can quickly find your podcast? And when they click on that page, is it then easy for them to find individual episodes or, more importantly, to subscribe? Like I'll tell you, Johnny, one thing right now that we have to do on the Showrunner website is we've added to our individual episode pages all the links for subscribing, but we've got to put those on our main podcast page so that when people go to just the podcast archive page, the first thing that they see is how to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, how to subscribe on Stitcher, all the different places where people might listen. You want to make it as easy as possible for people to consume your podcast in the way that they want to. And if that is hard, every additional step that you require people to take, some people are going to drop off and they're not going to follow through on it. So you've got to make your podcast easy to access. And for example, this client that I was working with, her podcast page had 3 individual links for her first 3 episodes, and she was on episode 12 by now. So it wasn't even giving an accurate reflection of where the podcast was. There were no links to Apple Podcasts, nothing. It just, if you clicked on the image, the Libsyn link opened in a new window. It was not the experience that you want to give to someone who wants to listen to your show. So you've got to make sure that your site's making your podcast easy to access. And the way to do that is to go use your website like your user would and go through the experience like they would. Don't just take it for granted because you set it up or your developer set it up that it's going to work. You also want to make sure that your website is establishing your authority. So, having an about page that explains who you are, what you do, that it looks nice because people are going to they're going to start to generate an opinion of you based on that first impression. So just make sure that it's establishing your authority. And then, and this is so important, make sure that your website is actually capturing subscribers. So this was one of the first things I did when I went to her website is a little pop-up came up. I entered my email address in because I was like, okay, let me see what she's doing with email. I got nothing. I got no confirmation email. No emails came up. And when I told her this on our call, she was like, wait, what? Like she was taking it for granted that it was gathering her email subscribers and it wasn't. Something was broken on there. So how do you expect to generate results from your show if the result that you're trying to generate isn't even happening when people get to your website? So these are things, and look, if you set it up, you expect it to work, but you may still want to check every couple of months, or if you're, checking your stats and they're not going up, or if you're, not seeing whatever the results are that you're looking to have, you've got to have a way to track this to know if things are working. So that's number 2. Is your website doing the basics? Because if it's not doing them, then you may actually be succeeding with your podcast, but you're not going to succeed in driving results because the step that you're asking people to take with your podcast, they're taking, but it's not getting them anywhere closer to you. Any other ideas, Johnny, about things that people should check on their website when they go look for this to make sure it's doing the basics?
Yeah, I would do it on your desktop and do it on a mobile phone as well. But it really is about, especially when we think that we know that like that sign up box works because it's worked when I put it there a year and a half ago. But it pays to have sort of a system in place to go through this every couple of months and make sure those things still work, because everything software is getting updated all the time on your website, plus on if you're using ConvertKit or something, and things just do change and they stop working. And it's fine with Jared doing it for a client and getting a bad experience because he's kind of looking for that so he can help. But somebody, if I just find you and I go and I sign up and I don't get anything, one thing I'm just going to forget. And the other thing is I'm not going to go look for another place to put in my email. I'm just not. I'm going to move on to something else, and that's just kind of how it works. And so, I mean, I would be as guilty probably as anyone. There might be a place on my site where you could sign up because, I mean, especially sites as they get big and things kind of, you know what I mean? Like landing pages were there that you're not using anymore, all those kinds of things. It does pay to go through even sections of your website here and there, depending on the size of it, and really checking on those things. And really setting up a place where it's easy to subscribe 100%, especially with big sort of buttons, because again, like half the people are on their phone. And if it's like a text link, sometimes it's hard to click on. And again, if I click a link 2 or 3 times and it doesn't work, I'm just going to get distracted. Somebody's going to text me. I'm going to just touch that and I'm gone. So if there's a button, you would just end up right there. It opens the app, subscribe. Perfect.
Yep.
So it's really, it really is sort of the fundamentals, and it's also things that once they're set up, you still need to go back periodically and verify they still work.
Yep. All right. So that was number 2. The third piece of low-hanging fruit that you need to go look at and go make sure is, you know, how you want it to be is your podcast page in Apple Podcasts and elsewhere, but especially Apple Podcasts, because we know that that's, you know, kind of the main place where people listen. Is this page buttoned up? Is it explaining things the way that you want it to explain? Is it utilizing all of the different kind of meta pieces of information as strategically as you want it to? And I can't tell you how many times recently I've looked at pages and there are just basic things wrong. Like, Johnny, when I was doing, so I just put together this lesson about, you know, how to name your podcast for the positioning course. And I was going through and I was just looking at a bunch of different names to get ideas and to use as examples. There was a show, Johnny, that the title section of their Apple Podcast entry said "test, test." Have I told you this before? I don't know if you've seen that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was, you know, the name of the podcast, because it's in the description. I even remember it. It was like the blank and blank show, whatever. It was like some agency or something, and the show was just the name of the agency. But the title of the show, like according to Apple Podcasts, was "Test, Test," which is why I said the first rule of naming your show is to, you know, you got to have a name and then you got to actually use a name, which you should take for granted. But again, like, these people are not idiots. Like, it's probably a great show, but it's really easy to mess up this meta information. So you just want to go take a look and make sure, because Apple Podcasts is pulling that from your RSS feed. And if you had someone else set this up for you, if you were going through it fast, or you didn't have a name yet, so you just put in "test" as a placeholder, but you never changed it after you put your name in, you know, now people are looking at your show and it says "test, test." And you know, you may think, okay, well, that's not that big a deal. But the other thing to remember there is a title is such an important part of, you know, how Apple Podcasts is going to surface shows when people search based on keywords. So if people look for your show based on your name or based on keywords, you're not using your title now to actually give it relevant information. So it can really hurt you in a number of ways. So again, you know, that might seem ridiculous, but I bet if we talked to the hosts of that show, they would slap their heads and be like, I can't believe we made that mistake. So just make sure that you're not making that mistake. And while you're there are plenty of other things that you can think about. So number one, and this is what I talked to this client about, is could you be doing more with your author name? And Johnny, the example that I actually used was you. Ooh. So I can't remember exactly what it is, but on your podcast author name, it says something like Johnny Nastor, you know, author, podcaster, something else, right? Instead of just saying your name. And why not do this? Not only does it build authority because it shows these things that you've done, but it also adds keywords that could potentially surface in search. So she just had like the lowercase, like Apple ID, and that's just not doing anything for you. It's not helping if people search for your name. It's not helping if people search for your brand name. And this is a very easy change to make. So could you be doing more with your author name? Like, I think for mine, it says like, you know, Jared Morris, Indiana Hoosiers basketball podcast host, something like that, because I have 2 shows about IU basketball. So again, I want those shows and myself to surface when people search. That helps to do that. So that's another place. And here's the last one that I'm going to say here, Johnny, is talking about reviews. Again, this might not be something that you think about, but this is why you've got to go do this through the eyes of people who might be, searching for your show or investigating your show. Number one, do you have reviews? Because it's nice when people can see the reviews that are there. I think those actually make more of a difference now in building authority and getting people to listen to the show than just moving you up in the rankings. Because I think subscriptions make more of a difference there. So you want to have those reviews there so that when people go to your page, they see them and they're like, oh, other people are listening to the show. Other people are ranking the show highly. And Johnny, you and I often tell people, leave a review for your own show. Why wouldn't you do that? Your show should always have at least one 5-star review, and it should be yours. Here's what you cannot do. Don't leave a review that is under your name, which is the same name as the author that you've used in the podcast host, and try to act like it's a third-person review. Like, oh, I just listened to the show for the first time. Right, you should really listen to this show, but it's your own name there. This is what this client did. And I get it. Like, she was trying to do the right thing, but especially for her, like, she's trying to build a brand around authenticity and, all this stuff. And it's like, well, that right there is just going to leave the wrong impression. So if you're going to leave a review under your own account name, and it's easy to see that that's linked to your show, say, hey, I'm really excited about this show. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions or comments, use this review space to ask them or send me an email or, say something where it's like, it's you reviewing your show as you, not as someone else, because it's just going to leave a bad taste. And when we talk about how the most important element and the most important reason to podcast is to create connection, that's a great way to lose connection where you're trying to act like you're something that you're not in front of your audience. And again, it might seem like a small thing, but I think all these little details add up. So just and again, these are things that you can just go look at. She had no idea. And that was the first review that came up. And she had 67, 68 reviews on there, but it was the first one. So just go look at that. Make sure you didn't leave a review like 3 years ago, like kind of offhandedly, and that it's still sitting there. I want to talk about naming conventions in a second, Johnny, but anything else, as you think about someone's, page there on Apple Podcasts, you've got your main title, your author name, your description, other things that you think are, just potential pieces of low-hanging fruit that people should look at to make sure that they're not missing.
The one I see a lot is the description or lack of description. So many times I see just like one short sentence like, this is a podcast about this. And you have, 250, 350, 400 words, something like that. iTunes is Apple Podcasts, if you want to call it that, is the largest by far search engine for podcasts. They don't search your audio. They don't know what you're talking about. They only know what you're about by what you put in your description, your author title, and your title. And then the titles of the episodes. You absolutely have to put in your description there and think about people who would be searching. What kind of questions would they be typing in? What kind of topics are they typing in to search that you would like them to find you for? Make sure those are in your description. That is literally the only way people can find you. And when you can start getting just raw traffic from iTunes, like, it's amazing what it can do for your listenership. But you have to do as Jared said. And then to me, it's that description. It's only, I think, because I really noticed the description or lack of, and it always just like, why would you do this? So
yeah, it's a place to explain what your show is about and to put a lot of keywords. And again, I used your example when I was talking to her about this. Your show, Hack the Entrepreneur, is an example because you do a great job of putting a lot of keywords in there, and just so that if people are searching for those topics, Apple Podcasts has some way of knowing that your show is relevant for those topics. Because as you said, they're not scanning the audio yet. I'm sure at some point that'll happen. But for right now, until that happens, we've got to tell them with text what the show is about. So that's the other place to use. And then, one other area that I want to talk about, and some people may disagree with this, but I think having a naming convention so that your episodes look nice and organized, I think that matters. Because again, I think, we're talking about these little details, but I think also just the overall picture of when people go to that page and look, they're developing an impression. And so having nice show art, having a good title, having your description in there. And then I think when people look at your episodes, having a naming convention that makes them just look nice and organized, like, hey, this is a professional operation here, is important. It's like for you have HTE space the number. For our show now, we do a bracket with the number. That's what I've done on the assembly call. I think it's nice. for people to see how many episodes you've done. If you've done 400 and some, it builds some authority to show that you've been around for a while. Even if you're only on episode number 4, if you number it as number 4, it's now easy to make a callback in episode 10 when you say, hey, like we talked about on episode 4, which is a lot easier than trying to remember the episode title and give people something long and cumbersome to remember. So it gives you that ability. But again, I think it looks nice, it looks organized, and it presents something to someone who's coming to listen that shows this is an organized professional operation. And I think you want to do all these things. People have a lot of other options for what they can listen to. And you don't want something as silly as that to just leave even a subconscious or subtle little, negative in their mind. And this client, she had some episodes numbered and then some weren't, and then they were numbered in a different way here. I was like, if you're going to number them, just do it the same way every single time. So it all looks nice. So it's all neat. But here's the thing to remember about numbering your episodes. Don't take up too much space, because when people look, they're only going to see 35 to 40 of the characters of your title. And you've got to use, the title is important for Apple Podcasts as a search engine, but it's also important for your actual listeners to see what is this episode about so that they can decide if they want to listen. And so if your, naming convention takes like 10 characters, now you only have 30 characters, you might not be able to get the keywords in that'll actually get people to listen. So just make sure, do it as efficiently and as, in as short a manner as you can, but just pick a way and then do it that way so that it looks organized.
So I shouldn't put John Nastor's Hack the Entrepreneur's Podcast's number spelt out, and then
probably not.
642.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the way that you do it on Hack the Entrepreneur is as long as I think anybody should do it. I mean, you're taking up 7-8 characters to do it.
You could,
and I think that's fine. And here's what I told her is I think it's okay for you to do it to have the HTE in there, because you actually use. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you use HTE as an abbreviation. Like, can't people go to hte.io for your website?
Right. And I want people even more to know when I do reference HTE, that's what so there, to me, if they're a subscriber, they know it as HTE. So that's totally branding to me.
That's why I thought it made sense. But if there wasn't an actual reason behind that, that would be 4 wasted characters, but in your case, it actually makes sense. So again, there's not a right answer for this. But it's about being strategic with it. And the whole purpose of this episode is everything that we've talked about here. It is an easy change to make. Number one, it's an easy problem to diagnose if you just look, but then it's an easy change to make if you see it. So the takeaway from this episode should be to go out and investigate these things. Google your name, Google your brand name, make sure that what comes up is what you want to come up. Look at your website. Make sure that it is providing as easy a path to listening to and subscribing to your podcast as possible. And then look at your show in Apple Podcasts and elsewhere where it is, and make sure that it looks neat, that it looks organized, that it's giving the information that you want to both listeners and to the place, whatever the engine is that people might be looking at, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever. Make sure it's giving those places the information they need to surface your shows for relevant searches. And if you're a little unsure about your ability to do this, ask someone else to do it for you. Ask one of your listeners to do it, or someone else, so that you can see it through their eyes, because they may pick up on some things that you already take for granted. And then when you see a stumbling block, just make the change, because these are all really easy changes. They're simple changes. And before you go on and try and figure out your next advanced strategy to use, make sure that all of this stuff is buttoned up, because any mistakes here can actually put leaks in your funnel that just really impede your ability to drive the results from your show that you could be driving. So that, I think, is the main takeaway. Any other takeaways, Johnny, that people should have from this?
My thinking goes to, and I think it's because maybe you and I have talked about this. Well, we have, but I'm thinking maybe that's why I'm thinking this way. What are your thoughts on making separate landing page for subscribing to your podcast? And then sort of everywhere where you mention the podcast in each episode, if you want, you could just have a link or button to subscribe here. And rather than always having to have like 10 different places, because people are listening on a lot of different places, it just takes them to a landing page that is all about podcasts and subscribing.
Yes, 100%. I actually think we should do an episode about that. It's interesting you brought that up because I talked about that with this client. This is kind of one of the next things that we talked about doing, because she was like, we talked about her call to action, and she was saying, what should I use as the call to action? And I learned this from you, as I said, just set up a page that you can constantly send people to from the podcast. And it can change as things change with your show and with you, but you can always send people here, and they can always subscribe to your show, and whatever your latest, opt-in incentive is, or your latest, nudge that you want to send people in a certain direction, you can update this page with that, but something that will be relevant now, a link that will be relevant now and relevant in a year, so that if people come back and listen to your episodes a year from now, they can go to this page and still get the most updated thing from you. So you can even keep your call to action a little bit general, but just send people to this page and they can always get whatever the latest thing is.
Speaking of call to actions, let me add this in, because I got this email just like a couple hours ago from a young listener in, I think it would be New Zealand. Kiwi, he says. But it was pretty long, but I'm just going to say, I've listened to almost all of your podcasts. I have 450. And I enjoy them so much. Help me stay motivated. Nice. All this stuff. And then he's got like a cool idea for me. But then at the end, because he's responding to the very first email you get when you sign up. And at the very end, he says, yes, your persistence has finally paid off. Asking me to visit the website, post a review, and get on this email list has finally happened. It also got me to email you. Thank you for the value, time, and effort you put in.
And it only took, 400 and some episodes?
Of me saying, go to the website, hacktheentrepreneur.com, and make sure you get on the email list and reply to me. And I love how he's even aware of it. Like, I heard it enough times. There it is. And now he's so happy and excited.
I mean, I think we need to think about our calls to action like we think about our episodes. Why does podcasting work? Because it's on-demand audio that people can listen to whenever they want to. So we need to think about our calls to action in the same way. Let them be on demand for the user, that whenever they're ready to take action, they can, and there will be something relevant for them there. So if everything is, based on the week that you're putting it out and people have to take action right now, that's not allowing people to take the action when they're ready, or taking into account and respecting the listeners that you may have 6 months from now. So I think I'm glad that you brought that up. And, here, buried in the final 5 minutes of this episode are probably 2 more episode ideas that we need to flesh out into full episodes.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of call to action and closing the show, just want to thank you for being with us here for another week as we talk about driving meaningful results from a podcast-centered marketing strategy. If you want more from us, whether you are listening to this episode on the day that it comes out, July 11th, 2018, or at some point in the future, maybe August 30th of 2021, maybe you're listening to us then. Doesn't matter. If you want more from us, if you want to join one of our courses, if you want to view our show archive, if you want to get on our email list, we are ready for you. So visit showrunner.fm. You will find what you are looking for. We'll be back with another brand new episode next week. We hope that you will be here with us. Until then, be authentic, be useful, and keep showing up. We will talk to you soon.
Take care.
For some reason, I was about to say August 36th, 2021, which is...
We've extended out August at that point because global warming has really come in. So we got to make August longer.
Given how things have gone, would that really be shocking?
I should actually not be jokes like that.
Yeah.
It's a terrible joke to make.
That's funny. Thank you, Bob and Ben, for being here. Appreciate it. Ben is doing some awesome stuff, man. Ben is a guy who's he's another Indiana IU basketball podcaster.
Oh, nice.
Just got a show on iTunes, just got a show on Google Play, on Stitcher. He had been hosting it just on SoundCloud, and I was trying to listen to it, and I was searching for a show, and I couldn't find it. So I just asked him if he was on iTunes, and he hadn't put it on there yet. And so he submitted it, got reviewed within 24 hours on all those places. So he's, which is awesome. Now his show is just in more places that his audience can listen. So, and for him to be discovered, that's that's what you don't want to have, is someone to be excited to listen to your show. They search for it in their app of choice and they don't find it because there's no studies on it. But what percentage of people do you think when they do that, just, they just kind of go on to the next thing? 90%, 95%, maybe more.
Yeah. I've had a few, like a handful, like 5 or less probably occasions where somebody's actually emailed me and said like, oh, I love to listen. The last one I remember was like, I always listen to you on Stitcher and I'm on a road trip and you're not on Stitcher anymore. And it was like, whoa. And I went to Stitcher and somehow my account had gotten screwed up. I emailed support and it was back up in like an hour. And I replied to him, but I was like, wow. But I mean, how many people on Stitcher looked first?
I know. So here, Ben has a question. He wants to know, should I include the title of my podcast on the title of each episode, even though my main podcast homepage has the title already? Example, Hoosier Heartland iTunes page. Should each episode have Hoosier Heartland still included in the title? Does including your title in each individual episode distract listeners or draw them to it? The answer to that is no. You should not include your podcast title in the episode titles. It's redundant without giving you any value. So people, once they subscribe, like what should happen is your show art should have your title in it clearly enough that it should come up next to your podcast episode so people know what the show is, they know what your title is, and then they see the name of your title. If you always have Hoosier Heartland in there, now you're just giving someone this kind of redundant description that doesn't tell them what this particular episode is about, and your guest or your topic gets buried after that. So it doesn't really offer you any benefits. I don't think you get any benefits of them seeing it over and over again. You want to make sure that your show art, that the name is legible enough that they're seeing it that way. Is there any reason why that would be good to do, Johnny, that you can think of?
No, not at all. Unless you wanted to confuse Google, then that would be a good reason to do it. So Jared's right, and Jared's always thinking about the user on the page, which sometimes I actually glance over, and I'm thinking about how people will find you and putting the title of your show. If I put Hack the Entrepreneur thing every single time, Google would just ignore my titles because it's just like 400 all the exact same. And so this way your keywords or the titles actually get closer to the front of your title, and therefore Google can analyze it and know what it is and then help people find it. And even the way SEO, especially if you're using something like Yoast, it will still tell Google that it belongs to your show, but not specifically in the title. So you're good to go.
Yeah, and Ben says thanks. He says it was annoying to me looking at it. Well, but you know what? But that's a really interesting statement, because I think it's important to trust your instincts. You know, if it's annoying to you to look at it, then it's probably going to be annoying, to your listeners who are looking at it. So, you're the first consumer of your podcast. And I'm not saying that you always want to trust that the way that you look at it is perfect. You want to see what your listeners actually think about it. But, trust your instincts. If it's annoying you, if it's not giving you a good experience when you look, then take it out. One example, the only time that you would really want to put something kind of in front of the title that isn't just a description of the actual title is, let's say that you have several different formats that you use. And so you wanted to note that this is an interview, or this is a panel discussion or something. Like maybe you would put that at the beginning, like interview such and such, if it's not going to be clear. Like we run into that with the assembly call, is in the same feed. We have our post-game show and we have our radio show, and they're just different formats. And so I thought for a while, like maybe at the beginning of radio show episodes, I should put radio show so that people know what it is. But then I looked at it and it kind of annoyed me. It pushed the important keywords out, and I just didn't think that it actually gave value to people. So I just took that out and now just put a description in. And so, sometimes you do want to just, look at it, kind of trust your instincts on that, test it, see what works, ask a couple people like Ben has done here. Yeah, I think if it's annoying you, that's probably a red flag that it's something that you might want to look at changing.
As showrunners, I think most of us are also podcast consumers. And so we have, I think, innately sort of within us, or at least honed through our experiences consuming podcasts, I think we have within us a pretty good intuition about what is the right thing to do in those instances. So definitely follow your gut when it tells you something feels just off.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for joining us live, Ben. Those were great questions. We appreciate it. And we will talk to you all live next week, next Wednesday, same time, same place. See you, everybody.